Welcome back to Ruben Uncut. I'm going to be looking at the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. interview on the Young Turks. I don't expect this to be, this may be considered poisoning the well, but I don't really think of RFK Jr. as someone who should be president. I'll just say I do not. They found literally a worm. I think it was dead, but they found a worm. They thought it was a tumor. There was a dead worm in his brain. That's wild for several reasons. The man literally had a parasite, and we don't know what parts of his brain have been affected or how his brain has compensated for having a worm eat part of it. So, yeah, let's find out, shall we? I've mixed feelings on the Young Turks. I don't really think they're as relevant to this. Well, actually, some of my feelings on the Young Turks might be relevant to this. Specifically, that Cenk Uygur here is someone who is very anti-Biden running again. And I'm going to keep it real. I was not a fan of Joe Biden just automatically leading the nomination, and I thought that they should maybe do something about it. But at a certain point, I realized that it would just cause more problems. They're just, once it reaches a certain point, there's just too much threat of like self-sabotage to your party. I think Cenk dropped out of running for president, though, probably for the best. RFK Jr., who is down in the polls right now. He had much better polling than I expected when I saw where he had dropped from. But people are currently bailing on him. Was this interview one of the reasons why? Hard to say. This came out Monday.
All right, joining me now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., presidential candidate, independent, and doing really well, ranging from 10 to 15 points, which is gigantic for a third-party candidate.
That is huge for a 15-party candidate. He is down from 15 at this moment, though.
Bobby, welcome. Good to see you.
Cenk, thanks for having me on the show. It's good to be back with you.
All right. So, look, we're going to give you a fair hearing here.
On a certain level, though, like, why would I even care? I mean, RFK Jr. at a certain point, it's just like, oh, great. Another incredibly old white guy.
Unlike the rest of media. So we agree on some things, as you know, we disagree on some things, as you know. So, but I want people to understand how media generally works because it's so important to politics. So, for example.
Side note, I don't like RFK Jr. because he thinks that vaccines cause autism. I'm living proof you can get autism without vaccines. I'm not going to get into that, but I did get my COVID vaccines. But I was raised by hippies. There, does that explain it to you? Let's go on.
A lot of people have been talking about, oh, the worm that was the parasite in your brain, etc. But that wasn't a recent thing, was it, Bobby? That was from a while back.
It is irrelevant how old it is. Part of his brain was still eaten by a worm. Now, to be fair, people have survived things surprisingly well missing parts of their brains, although it can have radical effects on things like your personality. I do not care how long ago this happened. The public should know that this man had literal brain worms.
And so tell me about how a story like that comes up at a moment like this.
That was something that happened to me almost 15 years ago. And it was the
how long has he been lying about? How long has he been spreading wackadoo information about vaccines? Has it been longer than 15 years? Has it been less than 15 years? A worm was in his brain.
It was the subject of a question that they asked me during a deposition about my divorce. The New York Times went back and dug up, in their explorations of my past life, they dug up that deposition, and then it's
pretty normal for people who are running for office.
They did a story on it. So, but a lot of people. people thought that I had actually made an announcement that I have a worm in my brain.
Yeah.
I learned from the publicity that that was attendant to that, to all of the Sturm and Drang around that people have the same.
Sturm and Drang is a theater term. It comes from Greek theater. I mean, he basically means that there was a big to-do about it.
A parasite, and it's very common. My doctors originally thought that I got it from eating undercooked meat in India. But
cook your meat.
You can also get it. I learned this, recently. You also can get it from hog production farms. And as you know, I had been.
Don't eat pig.
I spent a lot of years litigating against those. I spent a lot of time in and out of these big factory farms, and apparently it's a pretty common
Jesus Christ. I didn't want that job before, and now that I know you can get a little literal brain worms from it, I want it less. Damn.
Parasite among farmers who are running those operations, so I guess I could have gotten it there too.
Yeah. So the reason I bring that up is because what we try to do is we look at it and go, okay, but why is it coming up now, right? And would it come up against any normal candidate that's a Democrat or Republican, or is this a thing that they do to outsiders where they go and dig and dig and dig and try to find something? And the second part of it is, I looked it up as well. It turns out it's not 1 billion. It's 1.7 billion people that have that parasite. And so now that's the context that you never hear, right?
But do they all get it in their brain? I genuinely don't know. I think that is a worthwhile question. Clearly, Cenk is running defense for RFK Jr. here. I don't know if that's going to be like the motif. I don't know if this is going to be like when Tim Pool sat down with Trump, or if he just specifically thinks the brainworm thing is overblown.
Right. So right-wing media was pretty good to you when you first started because you were in the Democratic primary. Let's keep it real, and they were trying.
They were kind to him because he spouts a lot of the same talking points, specifically about vaccines.
Trying to hurt Biden with it. Now right-wing media hates you too, and all of a sudden they're finding things and they're throwing stuff.
Because he could potentially take, he could potentially take votes from Trump.
About you, mainstream media hasn't been exactly kind to you. So who do you think is worse in your experience, mainstream media or right-wing media?
Well, do you mean worse?
Worse to you?
I think the mainstream media, the kind of liberal, and the networks, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and then all the kind of liberal news sites are, but number one, they won't let me on to do live interviews, with one exception, which was Aaron Burnett, which was recent. But none of them have let me on for many, many years to do live interviews. And to this day, they won't let me on. So
I'm not going to vouch for these companies. I assume that there's some biases going on. I assume that a lot of them don't want to talk to him because he gets pretty weird with the vaccine stuff. But also, this is just speculation. He is and I feel bad for him. Did he have like throat cancer or something? Because he is a little hard to listen to. Might be television's being ableist, is what I'm saying. I don't know.
Oh, we're hoping to crack that. And I think that's one of the reasons I do very poorly among baby boomers. So I beat President Trump and President Biden among Americans under 35. And
come on. Damn it, young people. Really?
Battleground states, I'm beating them Americans under 45. I'm beating them among independent voters, which are now the biggest demographic. This is the first presidential election in history where self-identified independents outnumber Republicans or Democrats.
His own family doesn't like him. It's worth noting. He is the least popular of all the Kennedys at this point.
Self-identified independents,
although all the good Kennedys are dead,
represent about 43% of the voting bloc, whereas Democrats are 27, Republicans are 27, and I think one of the reasons that I do so well among independents and young people is because they're getting their news from long form interviews. They're looking at alternative news sites. I asked my son Connor recently.
I wanted to argue with that, but I literally don't get my news from the mainstream media. I mostly watch like various things, various alternative media sources. Although I do also listen to NPR to ground me a little bit.
And Connor's 28 and very well informed, you know, went to great schools and you know, was very curious. And I asked him, have you ever seen a television news show, like an evening news show? And he went, nope. So you have a whole generation that.
Oh, he has spasmodic dysphonia, which is actually a disability. It's not like a cognitive disability, before anyone gets too excited about that. Oh, actually, it is considered neurological. That doesn't mean it's affecting his cognitive ability. It just means it is technically in his brain. No longer want to make fun of it.
Is, you know, is looking elsewhere.
But television might still be being biased because of it.
But the people who watch the television news are baby boomers. And I think baby boomers should, you would think, like me, because a lot of them remember the, you know, Camelot, the Kennedy era. I was a big hero to them when I was just an environmental champion and before I started talking about public health issues. But they are the one group where I have, that's my Achilles heel. If I make inroads in baby boomers, I'll win the election. If I can't get into that cohort, then I lose.
Yeah. So we're going to get to the things that we disagree on.
The largest voting demographic, old people.
In a second, but it is rather startling. I mean, when you think about it, because I've seen you peak at 18% in polls, and for a third-party candidate, that is a monster number. That is a gigantic number.
Well, you know, I got in the Deseret.
It is. That is actually massive. When I saw, like, he is going down on the polls right now, but when I saw he was previously at 15% in the same polls that he is now scoring lower in prior, that kind of blew my mind.
News in a poll this week that has me tied at 20% with Biden. And
overall?
Yeah.
Okay, that seems like an outlier.
In a three-way race. No, I think it's true in Utah, not overall.
Oh, in Utah. Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
But then, you know, the Quinnipiac poll, I think, had me at 27 points in Michigan. I'm at 26 in Arizona. So, and all I need to do is get to 34 to win the election. And a lot of the polls that have me in single digits are fixed polls. So
I don't know if he's just playing it off really well or if he really thinks he can win. It's hard to tell with third-party candidates.
They do something that they have never done before, which is they pose the question as if it's a two-way race between President Biden and President Trump. And
that's actually super common. Okay, I'm sorry. I used to work in polling. Polls almost never ask about third-party candidates. That's not new. Did he just say it was new? Because it's not. It's not weird that they're not asking. I mean, like, with these numbers, it makes it hard for me to believe they aren't asking, to be completely honest. But, like, if that is a thing that's occurring, it's not surprising. It's not surprising at all.
And then they offer or other. So most people, they say, if you had to vote between these two, which one is it? And for those who push other, they are sent to a different field, and then they're asked about me, Cornel West, and Jill Stein.
Oh, that makes total sense, actually. I used to work in polling. I'm not surprised. Actually, that's more recognition than some polls would give a third-party candidate.
So it's a two-step process to get to me. And
no, that's so unfair.
Right, and we know.
I don't know if it's unfair. I don't know if it's unfair. A lot of polls are trash. I'll tell you that. A lot of polls are paid for to influence you about other candidates. Him getting left off of polls is like one of those things where it's like, if you're getting left off of stuff like that, it's a sign that they don't view you as an actual threat.
No, because Quinnipiac did it both ways at one point. And we saw that when they did it the regular way, as it would appear on the ballot, that I was 17 or 18 points. Whereas when they did it the second way, then I dropped down to 9 or 10 points.
So did CNN ever give you a reason why they wouldn't do it?
I don't know. Do I give a shit about his polling? My God, how much time did we spend talking about polling?
Town hall with a guy.
I mean, I guess it's relevant because he's a third party candidate.
That's anywhere between 8 to 18 points.
Well, they didn't have to give me a reason.
But like, I understand why these statements are being made. But like, I would rather learn about his fucking policies. Please comment on the video if you prefer this harsher but brighter light, or this softer but warmer but darker light. I'm gonna stick with this for as long as I can, but I don't know how long the sun's gonna be up on this recording.
Jake Tapper went on the air and said, "I will never have Robert Kennedy at a town hall."
Oh, okay.
So,
what if you win? I don't know. And then
maybe
going to have a town hall?
But actually, it's interesting because this week, Anderson Cooper, who, and I've been very critical of Anderson Cooper during the pandemic and during the lockdowns.
I don't fucking care. Although if he does shit on journalists regularly, that might actually explain why he's not getting invited on to do interviews, because the media hates that. When politicians come for the media will go for the throat. They did it with Nixon, they did it with Trump. I'm sure I could find a lot of smaller examples. Like, it's like, if you're going to antagonize the media, they will come for you. So just to let you know, that is normal. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying that, like, it's kind of expected. Like, you're poking the bear, and they will poke back.
And I know that he and I knew each other over time, kind of acquaintances, and had a decent relationship, but he's been very, very antagonistic toward me. And he actually did a very nice show about me this week for the first time. So, where they were interviewing people who are my supporters and trying to figure out, what's wrong with them. Do they have a worm in their brain?
What's wrong with them? Okay, see, look, I don't mind people not liking you, and I don't mind people voting against you, as long as they know what they're actually voting for. And I think that the rest of the media does a great disservice when they don't actually hear you out. So let's hear you out. So, Bobby, as you know, I don't agree with you on vaccines because we've talked about it before. And so help me understand this. So if you say to me, hey, listen, Big Pharma is lying about X, Y, or Z, that doesn't seem inconceivable to me at all.
Finally, getting to the policies. I will say, like, my bar is very low. I just watched the Logan Paul Trump interview, and like, Logan Paul is terrible at what he's doing. I mean, like, Cenk at least knows how to interview a politician. So let's see what happens here.
Big Pharma, I can't stand them for a number of reasons. For all the
a lot of good reasons to hate Big Pharma. There's a lot of good reason to hate Big Pharma. That doesn't mean you should risk everyone's lives over what you think about a vaccine.
The reasons that you sued them in the past and the damage that they've caused in different cases, for the fact that they're preventing us from negotiating drug prices. So I'm not convinced by mainstream media or the lobbyists, et cetera. But when I go to talk to about the COVID vaccine, every doctor I know, every scientist I know, they say the entire medical community and themselves say that it does work and that you're wrong about it. So do you see, Bobby, why it seems like you're asking a lot of people by saying, no, believe me, instead of what appears to be the entire medical community?
Yeah, first of all, I bet you if you and I talked about vaccines and actually looked at data, you would agree with me on almost everything. But let me just, before I answer that question, let me basically outline how I stand on vaccines. Vaccines, no vaccine is safe and effective for everyone. There are certain numbers of people, the Supreme Court said.
That's true of all medicine. That's true of all medicine. It's also true of food. People have different, like our bodies function slightly differently. And most of the weirdest mutations that human beings have are invisible to the naked eye. Like you have to look in your genes to find it. And like things like celiacs and who can't digest gluten. What he is saying is technically true, but it's not a good enough reason to actually like, it's not a good enough reason to cause a panic. All drugs and vaccines are tested to a with percentile. There are going to be people who have negative side effects. That's why they have all those warnings in the ads.
Vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. That when they upheld the immunity from liability, they said unavoidably unsafe. You cannot make them completely safe for everybody. So, and if you look at the list on a manufacturer's insert,
it's true of medicine. That is literally true of medicine. Like almost any drug that is true of. Like you could be allergic to a drug just straight up. And that's just a thing that happens. And it sucks. And it's weird. And there's not really a thing you can do about it. All we can do is try our best to figure out what range of people are in fact allergic to a drug or have a negative side effect of a drug, what might interact with a drug they already have. There's a lot of reasons for this.
There's 420 injuries that are listed on the manufacturer's inserts from vaccines. My concern is the people who get injured.
Okay, like, is that total? Because if that's total, that is tragically sad for the people who were injured. But if that's a total number, hell, that could be an annual number. And that would put it like, make it still safer than, I gotta rewind that. We gotta, because like that, I have to have misheard that.
So, and if you look at the list on a manufacturer's inserts, there's 420 injuries that are listed on the manufacturer's inserts from vaccines. My concern is the people who get injured. And I think, and you know, the medical community.
Okay, he's not a good, like, does he mean there's 400 possible injuries? Because that's very different. But also, like, even if there are 400 possible injuries, it doesn't tell us at what rate they occur. Although that is possibly data that you might find on that reading material. You'll find that reading material for almost any drug, but 99% of the time, people do not read them. If he means actual number of vaccine injuries, then that is nothing. But maybe he's just bad at communicating. Well, I'll give him relative leeway here.
Communities' reaction to those people is that we shouldn't talk about them because it will sow doubt about vaccines if you even admit anybody's getting injured. The vaccine courts have paid out billions of dollars in injuries, so the injury is...
Once again, like, that's a high number, but it doesn't paint us a full picture. Because, like, how much would you expect a single injury to pay out? 100 million? Because if it's 100 million, then we get to a billion fast. But if it's like $45,000, then we get to a billion slow. Do you see what I'm saying?
It's real, it's undeniable, and it's on the manufacturer's insert of every vaccine, and they're very serious injuries, including death. Whether they're rare or not, I think we should be able to talk about them. There are kids with rare cancers, and we talk about them. And if somebody has a vaccine injury, we ought to be able to, and the scientists and doctors who are treating them ought to be given a fair hearing. And that's really where I come down. I think we should have good science, and we all should have informed consent, which means everybody knows we have really good science.
Most of the time we do have informed consent. So I'm not exactly sure what he is implying.
It tells us all the answers about efficacy and safety. Everybody knows what the side effects are, and you can make an informed choice about it, and we shouldn't be mandating them to people. That's really, if you love your vaccines, I'm not going to take them away from you. I'm just going to give you good science, and I'm going to try to make them as safe as possible. Now, you pointed out the pharmaceutical industry is not a trustworthy industry. It's a criminal cartel, and I don't say that lightly.
That's pretty hyperbolic. That's a pretty hyperbolic thing to say. Okay, so here are some actual numbers. Distributed between 2006 and 2022, there have been a grand total of 11,907 cases. 3,298 of them were dismissed. And by the way, these are combined numbers of multiple different types of vaccines. But I can find you the majority of the largest number of cases are from MMR and varicella. I don't even know what those vaccines are for. Are those normal vaccines? Okay, hold on. Oh my God. Okay, never mind. You know what? There is a lot more numbers here that I do not think I would feel comfortable breaking down entirely for you. Adjudications, number of adjudications, petitions filed. Okay, here. Petitions filed, compensated, and dismissed by alleged vaccines since beginning of VIC-P 1988 through 2024. Okay, so here are a total of 12,743 cases. 10,000 of them paid out or compensated. There were 27,000 total filings. That means 27,000 people tried to get compensations. Only 1,424 of these were for deaths. The number of cases filed for different things are actually relatively low, with the largest number of cases being filed for the influenza shot, which actually makes sense. It is the most commonly got vaccine, and people get it every year, meaning that unlike ones you only get once, that kind of makes sense. I do not know what varicella is. It was over 1,000 MMR filings. DT, Hep. There's like so many different DTaP vaccines. One DTaP vaccine appears to have more filings than the others. But like I said, for the influenza, that might not be. Oh man, there's almost. Ooh, wow. Pertussis is a fairly safe vaccine, apparently. Very low number of filings. Certain vaccines have not received any death filings, including mumps. No one has filed for mumps killing them. The vaccine for it, I mean. Hep A and B have no death filings. A couple of the DTaPs that have no death filings. There's apparently a lot of different DTaP or DTP vaccines. Those might even not be the same thing. See, that's why you shouldn't get your news from me. You should look this stuff up too. But the point is that there appears to be more compensation. Like they're compensating at a level that suggests that they're not flat out denying cases. And there is a difference between some of the payouts. Some of the payouts are confirmed and some payouts are settlements. So there is a lot here, and I'm not going to break it all down. It's a long ass video.
4 companies that make all of the vaccines.
The point is that he's making them. What I saw there makes me think that he's making vaccines seem more dangerous than they actually are.
The 72 vaccines now mandated for our children, all of them in their other products have paid, I think, $79 billion in criminal penalties. They haven't paid anything with vaccines because vaccines are immune from liability. So you cannot, no matter how negligent that company is, no matter.
I will say that like the immunity to vaccines doesn't really make sense of me because of some of the reasons I was mentioning before. Well, with no medication ever truly being 100% safe.
How reckless they are, no matter how grievous your injury, you can't sue them. And you know and I know.
But there is a system for compensation. It's worth noting.
that if you tell a company that we can sue you if you do something wrong, they're going to be more careful about it.
Yeah.
And if you tell, these are companies that have been showing, for example, Vioxx. Merck knew that Vioxx caused heart attacks, but it didn't tell its customers. It marketed it as a headache pill and an arthritis pill. And so the customers went and took it, and maybe hundreds of thousands of people died as the result. Many of those people would have said, if they knew that it could kill them, they would have said, I'll take an aspirin instead. But they weren't told that. And Merck did that deliberately. They ended up paying about $7 billion in the end, but they still made money on the product. So what if you could tell Merck, here's a product you'll never have to, no matter what happens, no matter how sloppy you are, no matter how reckless, no matter how toxic.
So like, this is kind of an appeal to an intuition thing, though. Like, he's not, the fact that something can happen is not a guarantee that a thing has or will or is happening.
The ingredient, you'll never have to pay anybody any downstream liability. On your, you can bet that they're not.
I'm not sure who pays in to the vaccine settlement funds. I don't know if it's from drug companies or the government, but somebody is paying.
Probably not going to behave if you waive all liability. So that's something we should be concerned about. But as president, what I would do is I would get rid of that immunity.
Don't you disagree with him on vaccines? You're offering very little pushback here.
I would lift the immunity and make them accountable and make them responsible, because that's the only way to ensure the safety of this product. I would say this about the COVID vaccine. You remember at the beginning of COVID, we were told that if you take that vaccine, because you just said, the medical community all says it works. Well, what does that mean? Because originally they told us it would stop transmission, and that if you
Not really. No, they didn't.
Because if fewer people are getting it, there will be fewer people transmitting it. This is not hard math.
No, but check. You can go on there's whole reels out there on YouTube that your listeners can go to right now with
the man just encouraged us to go to reels. No wonder we're fucked. Look, I know everybody fucking loves short form content these days. I get it. I fucking get it. Okay. But like, when it comes to getting informed on shit, you really need some long form shit. Like, it is in context matters. Context matters. Being able to remember a source matters. And sometimes when you're absorbing like a bunch of reels or TikToks or whatever, that shit is just zipping by you, and you will forget where you even learned things. Sometimes context is very important, especially for a lot of the things that RFK Jr. is talking about right now. In fact, I would argue that I don't have enough context for a lot of this.
Tony Fauci saying, if you get this, you cannot spread it to grandma. You cannot spread it to anybody in your family. You are protecting other people by getting this.
Fauci and the medical community did do a really bad job of communicating a lot of things to the public. And in fairness, the public should be a little bit more understanding because of a novel virus being, well, novel. That means new. We haven't seen it before. We don't know how it's going to mutate. We don't know what it's going to become. It could become less dangerous. It could become more dangerous. The vaccines could be very effective, or they could be weakly effective. These are things that we can only really know from hindsight. And you can't cure a pandemic by saying, oh, well, I'll feel better once the medication has had the proper amount of being used for 50 years.
Yes. Well, that's because we were told that it would prevent transmission. Otherwise, how it's going to protect other people? We were guilted into it. We were shamed into it because they said
appeals to emotion. He wants you to feel bad. Like this doesn't mean anything. This being bad at marketing, which the government is, doesn't mean that the vaccine is bad or doesn't work.
it stops transmission dead.
Right.
And they all said this. Bill Gates said it. Tony Fauci said it. Elizabeth Burke said it. Robert Redfield said it.
But they're all guesstimating is the thing. It's new, so the virus is new. So we don't 100% know. You're just giving everyone your best estimate.
Joe Biden said it. They have him on tape again and again and again. That wasn't true, and they knew it wasn't true at the time. And I was saying at the time, it can't prevent transmission. Why was I?
Wait, do you have evidence that they knew it was true? Because if you have evidence that they knew that they were wrong, that's a different story. That's the kind of statement you gotta be able to prove.
Was I saying that? Because I was actually reading the science. In May of 2020, I read the monkey study.
Like when the tape came out that showed that Trump knew it was more dangerous than he was claiming it was.
And the monkey studies showed that the animals that were vaccinated were getting levels of concentrations of SARS-CoV-2 in their nasal pharynx that were equivalent to the unvaccinated. So it was clear then to anybody who looked at those studies that it was not going to prevent transmission or infection. So I
literally just made the argument for like how everyone's bodies are different, or maybe you didn't understand that was the argument you were making, but now you're talking about monkey transmissions. It's not guaranteed that their body will respond the same way as us.
I would say,
and did everyone see these? Can I see these? Is he even describing it properly? I don't know.
And if you look, and then I'll just say one other thing. All around the world, there are countries that were heavily vaccinated, and there were countries that were essentially unvaccinated. And I'm not saying this is a correlation. It does not prove causation. But for example,
it's worth noting that a large number of countries also weren't even using the same vaccines as us. Different countries had their own vaccines.
Our country, which was one of the most heavily vaccinated in the world, had the highest body count from COVID of any nation on earth. So we lost 6.
Wait a minute. We were not one of the most vaccinated. That is just wrong. We failed to hit the levels of vaccination. We never hit our vaccination quotas. Israel was way more vaccinated than us. Other countries were more vaccinated than us. Unless other countries' vaccinations were even worse levels than I remember. But we never hit the level that they always said we needed to hit to really get rid of it. How bad were other countries' vaccination levels?
16% of the American people. We had 16% of the COVID deaths in this country. We only have 4.2% of the world's population. So we literally did worse than any nation on earth. Now, we were told at the beginning by Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates, et cetera, that the nations that were going to get wiped out were the nations that couldn't afford the vaccine, specifically Haiti and Nigeria. Haiti had a 1.3% vaccination rate, and the death rate from COVID was 14 people per million population. Our death rate, American blacks, 3,000 per million population. In Nigeria.
He's fucking with numbers there, by the way, by specifically signaling out the blacks. And he calls African Americans the blacks. Like, not even black people or black Americans, the blacks. Oh boy.
Nigeria,
right? But
1.4. Now that doesn't mean the vaccine had anything to do with it. But what it means is it's something we should be studying.
But Bobby, look, let me just jump in. So number one, if you say, hey, let's study it, of course. I don't think any rational. No, but I don't think that's all you're saying, though. Hold on. So I think almost all rational people, including scientists and doctors, certainly say study it, of course, right? If you say, hey, the medical community said some things that were wrong at different times, like for example, Dr. Fauci said you don't need to wear masks in the beginning. Then later they changed it to you do have to wear masks. You lose faith with people when you do that. But it's relatively easy for someone like us that care about the news to suss out those things. I said that doesn't make any sense when they said, oh, a virus broke out right next to a virology lab, but it didn't come from the lab. That doesn't make sense. But at the same time, when I'm not the expert on it, you say that you are an expert on it. I can't debate you like on every single thing on Nigeria. So I do know there's a ton of factors. It might depend on the density of the population as opposed to the vaccine,
and the age of the population.
Right, and then you see countries like Sweden that gave up on their experiment of not sequestering people, right? So they were out and open, and then their COVID rate was out of control, and they had to bring people back in.
They ended up having the lowest COVID rate in Europe.
So there's a lot of data, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
So, but sometimes you do have to make things mandatory. I'm not saying every time, right? And that's a tough judgment call. So for example, on some vaccines, polio, smallpox, others, you might have to make it mandatory. George Washington made it mandatory for his army. He lost a third of his army, but won the war. And if he hadn't done that, if he hadn't made it mandatory, we're probably still living under England right now. So there are some circumstances where mandatory does make sense. So the main question is, for people who like your other policies, if the scientists and the doctors come in and say,
based on this world data I just found, Canada, various parts of South America, except for one country got no vaccination. What country is that? But Canada, parts of South America, China, Australia, and some other parts of Europe all had higher vaccination levels than the United States. The United States failed to hit 80%. So we were not the most vaccinated. So
Bobby, this one has to be mandatory. Here's the reasons why. Here's all the data, et cetera. Are you going to listen to them?
Listen, under some...
Are you going to listen to me? That's valid. That's valid. Bobby seems like a true believer.
Extreme circumstance, I may look at that and say this is so obvious, but the problem is you have a medical cartel that is tied inextricably to the pharmaceutical industry and is more concerned with...
Wouldn't the pharmaceutical industry be the medical cartel? What are you saying, Bobby?
Promoting the mercantile interests of the pharmaceutical companies and in public health, and they've shown that again and again and again. So listen, if you have a product that clearly works and there's a disease with a high infection rate, people are going to line up to take that product. I would leave it to the individual. I wouldn't say that that the government should ever be
leaving things to the individual when the primary sources are doing a bad job of communicating and there is a ton of misinformation isn't necessarily going to get you a good result, actually.
Mandating a medical product to, that you're going to do to your body. And we all agreed that after World War II with the, we signed the Nuremberg Code, there were trials just for doctors. At the end, they were called the doctor trials at Nuremberg because the medical community was so badly behaved in the Third Reich.
But you don't think that's...
Comparing our current medical situation to the Third Reich's medical experiments is pretty ballsy. We definitely have laws in place that would not let us do what they did.
That's what's happening with doctors in America. I mean, how is every doctor I know saying you're wrong? You think they're all wrong?
Well, first of all, there's, I think, 76,000 doctors have signed a petition essentially supporting my position. So it's not every doctor.
Okay, not every, that's fair, but definitely a very small minority of doctors.
Well, yeah, but the question is are the doctors, do they hold that opinion because they're reading a scientific study, or do they hold that opinion because the CDC told them this product works? And that, that's what I would ask the doctor. I'd say to him,
so he really just has a bad, all of his arguments rely on the idea that you cannot trust anyone in the medical establishment. But the reality is that that's not a full argument, because even a broken clock is right twice a day. You heard that expression? It refers to the fact that sometimes even people who are really wrong a lot or make mistakes or who are malevolent even can also be right. So it's not a full argument.
Show me the study that you're basing that opinion on. Because I read science. That's what I do for a living. I read science for a living.
That should not be what you are doing for a living. Don't you? Does he hold public office right now? Does RFK Jr. hold public office currently? Founder of Chairman's Health Defense. I guess he does not currently hold public office. I genuinely thought he did. Did he used to? He was once convicted for possessing heroin? Well, I'll be a son of a bitch. I don't see him holding office anywhere. And if he did, I must have missed it somehow in his Wikipedia. I thought he held some kind of office at some point.
I've tried something like 500 cases. Almost all of them involve scientific controversies. And my job is to deconstruct science and, and cross-examine.
Now that I understand, although I will say, now I understand he's a lawyer. That actually explains some of the way that he makes art. His arguments are designed to be convincing, not necessarily true.
And direct examine witnesses and find out whether they really are basing their opinion on something that is factual and is solid. So, and I think a lot of times doctors and the medical profession, they're so busy, they're not actually going out and reading the science. They're taking the word of CDC.
I think that's what's happening. That's not evidence. This is speculative.
Works, this product works. You should be recommending it. The AAP, the American Association of Pediatrics, makes these recommendations and establishes medical care protocols, but they get about 80% of their money from pharmaceutical companies. So don't we have to be worried, and shouldn't we be worried that those decisions are influenced by the money that they...
This is a sound argument for auditing someone, but it is also a bad faith interpretation of something that's happening. He's not presenting evidence, he's presenting concern.
They're getting by these conflicts of interest.
Well, I do worry about it. I worried about it in the OxyContin
It is worth worrying about. I'm not saying it's not worth worrying about.
Text, and so that's why I've got the credibility to be able to say, like, I see when they're doing wrong, but at the same time, I see when they're doing right.
Cenk, you know what? This is a really, really good example that you just brought up. OxyContin. Every doctor in America was prescribing OxyContin and telling their patients it's not addictive. Why? Because FDA lied. It colluded with Purdue and the other pharmaceutical companies to lie to the American public to make billions.
Example, because you're right about that, and it wasn't every doctor, but it was too many doctors. And then they set up junkets to get the doctors to Vegas and have a good time,
and the vaccine companies do the exact same thing.
I hear you on that, brother. But what happened with
like we have evidence of what was done with the opioids. Do you have that same evidence for vaccines?
Was eventually the doctor said no. This isn't right.
No. Eventually, what happened is there was litigation, and the litigation woke the doctors up.
I'm in favor of the litigation.
Right,
I'm in favor of all the work that you've done in the past on that front.
Right, but
the doctors now do say, "Oh, it's definitely addictive." But they've never said that about the vaccines that you complain about. And it's not just COVID. Goes back 20 years.
Cenk, this is what I'm saying. They changed their mind because of the litigation. All the discovery that came about because of that became public because of that litigation. What if you could never sue those companies? The doctors would still be writing those prescriptions. With vaccines, you cannot sue them. So they can keep all those documents secret. So imagine it's the same company. It's the exact same company.
Hold on, though. I literally just pulled up documentation of the actual cases that are brought against vaccines. I barely touched on it. I have to insist that it is a lot to look at. And yeah, but like it exists. I could find that. There is some process happening. Do we need to know more about that process? I'd be open to that. It's not enough to be speculatively into conspiracy.
But with vaccines, they cannot be sued.
Yeah, I think that there's a way to thread the needle where you could do a lawsuit maybe after some period of emergency has passed, et cetera.
You can't. Believe
I know
me.
we can't today.
But there's hundreds and hundreds of lawyers that have been trying to figure this out that have injured clients. And you cannot sue these companies.
Right. So let's go to the environment, because you've done a lot of litigation in the past, and that's part of why you were considered on the left, and someone who the press celebrated as on the left, et cetera. You sued DuPont a couple of times, won an enormous number of cases. So on environmental regulation, you have been terrific in the past, and in climate change. So tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but right now you say that you're criticizing green energy subsidies, you're for more oil drilling, and you are against the ban on fracking, and you're supporting free market solutions to the climate crisis. So that doesn't.
That is, okay, look, I glanced at his Wikipedia, so that's really fucking weird. Like, just based on the primary things that this man built his career on.
Doesn't sound like it jives with what I knew in the past. Am I getting that any of those facts wrong?
Yeah, you're getting those facts wrong. But if you go back and look at my speeches from 40 years ago, I always said the answer ultimately to environmental injury is free market capitalism, and we don't have that in our country. We have corporate crony capitalism.
Oh my God, I can't disagree with that any harder. Like, there are no, I don't believe that. I don't believe he can substantiate that. I mean, we are in crony capitalism, but the belief that the free market is a myth. You can't have 100% free market, because it will just become crony capitalism, or some company will eventually achieve a monopoly, and then they'll just dominate everybody.
And in a free market, a true free market,
Hey guys, all my policies would work with a unicorn in charge.
the actors in the marketplace would have to pay all the costs of getting that product to market, including the cost of cleaning up after themselves, which is a lesson we were all supposed to have learned in kindergarten.
Once upon a time, snake oil salesmen used to stride across America, selling people bullshit medicine that was sometimes poisonous. So his faith in unregulated markets is actually kind of fucking wild.
But they don't have to do that because they're allowed by, corruption and by control of the corporate control, the merger of state and corporate power, to externalize those costs and to get subsidies. And subsidies are a violation of the free market. So the carbon industry.
I do object to a lot of different types of subsidies.
Industry gets $5.2 trillion in subsidies every year. $5.2 trillion. That's why green energy is not competing against them. What I would do is end those subsidies to carbon. And in a true free market, a true free market promotes efficiency. And efficiency means the elimination of waste and pollution.
I don't believe that. I do not believe that. I do not believe that it promotes efficiency. Arguably, taking away corporate subsidies would encourage efficiency, but that a lot of times companies don't like efficiency. They like saving money, and saving money does not inherently make something more efficient. Sometimes it means you're cutting edges. You're cutting corners. That's the term, corners.
Ways. In a true free market, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community.
Also, not true. Your goal is to take other people's money.
What polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor. They raise standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for everybody else. And
there's actually a lot of industries that do this.
And they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market. You show me a polluter.
What is the free market solution to not? Okay, so no. There is nothing cheaper and more efficient than dumping your trash wherever you want. Holy shit, that's dumb.
I'll show you a subsidy. I'll show you a fat cat using political.
Some subsidies are literally designed to force people to do the right thing, like to properly dispose of their waste, to do other things like that. Sometimes that's us forcing them to do the right thing because it's cheaper for them to just dump their trash wherever they want.
Clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay his production costs.
So, but let's dive into something that's really important there, though. Yeah. So I agree with you on all of that. In fact, it's going to lead in a moment to something we massively agree on corporate influence in politics. But help me understand this part. So when you say support free market solutions, if that means, okay, well, let's just let the market sort it out. Well, that's one thing. If it means, hey, listen, you guys cause climate change, I'm going to make you pay for climate change. So hurricane hits Louisiana, that's an externality of your product, and I'm going to make you pay for it. Well, that's a different thing, right? And so which one do you mean?
Well, I mean that they should pay for their environmental externalities. I would not.
I don't know if that's technically a free market, RFK.
It's problematical to me.
Who's making them pay?
To use, at this point, to hold them accountable for climate change. But I don't think that you need to, because
let's let them off the hook for climate change,
There's so many other externalized costs that are associated with carbon. And let me give you a few examples. And if the industry had to pay those costs, it could not compete. For example, right now, I spent 15 years of my life as a partner in the biggest green tech venture capital firm in the world. It's called Vantage Point. We were the biggest and first investors in Tesla. We built, and I was personally involved with building the biggest solar thermal plant in our country. I was involved in building the biggest PVC plant, solar PVC in North America.
Oh, that's why. Because there are probably regulations standing in the way of him pushing his version of the environmental agenda because he is a green entrepreneur.
I was deeply involved. And I know what the costs are. The cost today of building a solar plant is about $1 billion a gigawatt. The cost of building a wind is about $1.1 billion a gigawatt. The cost of building a coal plant is $3.6 billion. And when you build a wind or solar plant, it's free energy forever. When you build that coal plant, now you got to go cut down the Appalachian Mountains. They've buried 2,200 miles of rivers and streams, which is all illegal. That cost should have been internalized. You have to burn the coal. That puts mercury in the environment. Every freshwater fish in our country is now contaminated with mercury. They should have to externalize that cost. There's $500 billion a year in respiratory.
But in a free market, what would make them do that?
Injuries from ozone and particulates. They should have to internalize those costs. Acid rain.
I agree that they should, but what he is describing is not a free market.
Has now destroyed the forest cover on the high peaks of the Appalachian from Georgia to northern Quebec. It's sterilized 1 out of every 5 lakes in the Adirondacks where I grew up. They should have to internalize those costs. If they had to internalize those costs, you wouldn't be paying 16 cents a kilowatt hour for coal burning energy. You'd be paying $3 and $4 and coal could never compete against more efficient.
But that's only if someone is making them pay for those things. Who is making them pay?
Forms of generation. Oh, but now if you talk, I'm trying.
Are you saying they already pay for that and subsidies cover it up? Because explain that. In a genuinely free market, who would make them pay?
One of the objectives of my campaign is to end the polarization, the division. The environment should be a unifying issue, and it can be if you talk about it right. If your solutions are aligned.
Because he wants to make money off the environment.
Everybody in this country, Republicans, Democrats, want clean water. They want clean air. They want to get rid of the toxics that are poisoning their children, their environment. When we did the the protests in Flint, Michigan over the lead crisis, we had Hell's Angels standing shoulder to shoulder with urban blacks. When we went to Standing Rock, we had union people, we had business people, Republicans, Democrats, all flocking to Standing Rock. Because we didn't sell it as a climate issue. We sold it as protecting a sacred place, and every American wants that.
Now we're just talking about marketing.
So, if you want to just talk about climate, Cenk, you're going to have a fist fight every time. But if you talk...
But why is that? Why is there a reactionary response to addressing the fact that climate change is a problem?
About habitat protection, if you talk about clean air, clean water, saving our aquifers, improving our food supply, these issues unite everybody. There are no such thing as Republican or Democratic children. Everybody wants their kids to have a clean environment. And so that's what I focus on rather than focusing on explicitly climate. And this is not new to this presidential election. I learned this 30 years ago when I was working for Waterkeeper, and people, I was talking to working people whose livelihoods depended on a clean environment. If I talked about climate, their eyes glazed over. If you talk about clean water, they're saying we're going to go to the barricades with you. We're going to die on this hill.
So, Bobby, one last thing on this. I understand all that, and I appreciate the...
That's a problem, Bobby.
Framing that you're putting behind it. I get the value of that framing, the correct framing. And I get that not only did you sue people to effectuate this kind of change and win, I get that you got arrested for protesting Keystone XL pipeline. I get all that.
And I spent a whole summer in maximum security prison in Puerto Rico for suing the Navy to stop the bombing of Vieques for water and air pollution.
Yeah, that's right. That's all correct. But one thing I want to make clear though is, because again, the devil's in the details here. If you say, okay, I'm going to take their externalities like coal creates, and I'm going to make them pay it, that is regulation, right? So look, I get it that you don't want to talk about it in terms of regulation.
Yes, thank you, Cenk. However you say your name.
I'm happy to call it whatever you want.
But I don't want you to go, like, if we were to, if you go into office and then you go, oh, well, I was using the framing, so you know what, I'm not gonna regulate them. I'm just gonna let the free market decide.
No.
That defeats the whole point.
No, I'm not.
You see what I'm saying?
Listen, markets, a market has to be regulated to do what it's supposed to do.
But the argument for free markets is that you don't regulate them, Robert Kennedy. Oh my God, you just, what? I agree, Robert F. Kennedy. Markets need to be regulated. Jesus.
The free market capitalism is the greatest economic engine ever devised, but it has to be hard.
But you don't know what it is. You're failing to describe a free market.
To its social purpose. Otherwise, it will gallop us down the road to oligarchy. Is
he just trying to appeal to libertarians by using the word?
A corporate kleptocracy to aristocracy and away from democracy. So every market works by rules. And what we want is to...
And the free market argument is that you don't need them.
We want to write rules that allow people to do well by doing good, rather than forcing them to do well by hurting other people. So every market needs rules. There is no market that does not have a set of rules. So
there's never been a free market, Bobby, you fucking brain-wormed moron.
You have a set of rules that says that, you can make money by polluting the environment, and you're allowed to externalize all those costs. There's going to be a race to bottom, and everybody's...
But Bobby, that's not... Oh my God. He gets it, but he doesn't get it. Oh my God.
He's going to do that. But if you say to people, you can't pollute, but we want you to create energy, and we're not going to put a lot of regulatory problems if you can figure out how to do that without hurting people, then you're going to see this ferment of entrepreneurial energy that our country is famous for, and it's going to solve these problems very, very quickly.
So let's go to another form of deregulation that happened through the Supreme Court, where they basically said,
just kept talking about deregulating when all he was actually talking about was regulating. Just do you? No wonder you did not win the Libertarian nomination.
You could just give whatever you want to politicians. And so that happened basically in 76 and 78 before Citizens United, and they, in my opinion, legalized bribery. And you see every chart diverge in 1978, worker pay flatlines, corporate profits go up, etc. So how do we get that under control? You're concerned about corporate rule, and as well as I am and our audiences for sure.
I don't know if I can watch this whole thing, but I do want to hear this because actually that we might all agree on this.
But how do we stop the money in politics from buying off all these politics?
Yeah, I mean, you and I are agreed on this 100% aligned that we need a constitutional amendment because you can't do it because the Supreme Court is not going to let it happen. And just to give a little bit of history, which you're very aware of, we really lost democracy at another time in our history during the 1880s and 1890s. A period called the Gilded Age, when these giant robber baron families, the Carnegies, the Fricks, the Rockefellers, the Mellons, the
who were empowered by the lack of regulation,
Morgans, sat on these interlocking boards for all these big trusts, the sugar trust, the oil trust, the rail trust, etc.
Yes. Because if you do not regulate a market, the market will team up and dominate.
And they controlled politics in this country. This was before the direct election of senators. Those senators were chosen by their state legislatures, and it was very easy for these giant corporate behemoths to control the legislatures. It was said at that time that the Pennsylvania legislature was the only legislature that was not for sale, because John D. Rockefeller owned all of them and wasn't selling any of them. So this is, and they were selecting the senators, they controlled the party, they were selecting the president, and we didn't have democracy. You had this confluence that I think we can take encouragement from today. You had
that was caused by a lack of regulation in the market, Bobby. Oh my God.
Populist movement rising in the countryside. You had a progressive movement, which was Republican, rising in the city. The populist movement was Democrat. You had muckraking journalists.
It's fair because populist just means an appeal to the common man as being oppressed.
Like Ida Tarbell. And
there are probably better ways to word that.
Upton Sinclair, who were working for McClure's magazine and writing these extraordinary exposés about the robber barons. And then you had Teddy Roosevelt, who came out of the oligarchy, but was not scared or intimidated by it. And at the beginning, after his election in 1903, we had the first passage of the income tax in this country. We had the direct election of senators. We had the 40-hour work week that was passed. We gave women the vote. We allowed unions to organize. We banned child labor, and all these bills that re-democratized our country. But the most important,
yes, those were regulations.
Important bill was a bill that was passed in 2008 and made it illegal for corporations to give financial contributions to federal political candidates. That law, more than any other law, turned our country back into a democracy. And that law lasted for 100 years, almost exactly to the day. So this very business-friendly Supreme Court overturned it in the Citizens United case. And that Citizens United case is insidious because the court did something to imbue constitutional protection on federal political contributions. It said that a contribution of money is a form of free speech. You can't regulate it because that would be an attack on the First Amendment. It's insane. There's no.
What he's right on here, actually. Like, this decision by the Supreme Court fucked America, like, hands down.
Other country in the world that has that rule, and it's destroyed our country. It has unleashed a tsunami of money that has made it, that has put government so far away from ordinary Americans. This presidential election, I've read that it's going to cost $15 to $20 billion. So President Trump and President Biden and the parties have to raise that money, mainly in $10,000 increments from the richest people in the country, and then they have to take all those people's phone calls. And that
I think they're just glorified servants, to be honest. I mean, and it ranges from 10,000 to independent expenditures. I can get to up to $100 million per person.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be unlimited, but Sheldon Adelson has given $100 million twice to Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020. His widow now, Miriam Adelson, considering giving him another 90 to 100
They give it to the super PAC or two.
They give it to a super PAC that then spends it for Trump. And then all of a sudden, Adelson's charges go away. They ban internet gambling because he has casinos in Vegas. And his wife gets Presidential Medal of Freedom, etc. So obvious and open bribery in not just in my it's obvious.
It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem.
There's just, and it's not just Trump, Biden, corporate Democrats, corporate Republicans. Mitch McConnell raised $1 billion. Democrats.
You're all like, the way it works is you almost have to do it.
Go, of course he's in the tank for his corporate donors. Nancy Pelosi raised $1 billion from the same people, and they go, oh no, she's an angel. No, they're both in the tank for their donors. There's no question about it. So, but now when we talk about solutions, so you say yes amendment. Yes, corruption definitely exists. This is legalized bribery. Yes amendment.
We need an amendment to the Constitution.
How about Article 5 convention, where so two ways to get an amendment. One is through Congress, but they got elected through corruption, so they're not going to say yes. The other way is to go through the states.
Yeah, we have to go through the states. As president, I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to each one of the states and urge them to pass this law. And the implementation of that law is contingent on all the other states passing it. So there's no risk for the state until everybody else agrees on it. And I think it can get done, and I'm going to work very hard, because if we don't do that, we don't have democracy anymore. We do not have a democracy now, because the little guy in this country has
So I can't lie. I like what he's saying right now. He cannot tell he can't tell a free market from a worm in his brain. But he is right on about this.
Absolutely no say in what's happening with his government. And I think that's part of the reason the rise in this violence and the polarization, et cetera. People know that they don't own their government anymore, that the system's rigged, it's rigged against them, and it's rigged to shift money upward and to, it's like a vacuum cleaner. All of these, the Fed.
That sentence there is what separates him from Donald Trump, is that he recognizes that it's designed to shift money to the upper classes.
And all of these, all of our laws and institutions are designed to strip mine wealth from the American middle class and send it north, And during COVID, it was kind of the shutdowns that we saw during COVID were kind of the coup de grace in the American middle class. They closed 3.3 million businesses with no due process, no just compensation. And, all of this, $4.3 trillion in wealth were shifted from the American middle class to this new oligarchy of billionaires. President Biden and President Trump created 500 billionaires and 500.
Most of that was done under Trump. But it doesn't really matter. It's still not good. Some of it is unnecessary. Some of it is unpredicted consequences of the whole thing. It is very convenient for RFK Jr. here that he can sort of tie all this stuff into a narrative thread for himself. Which is actually kind of why I don't trust him on a certain level. That he thinks like that. And you can't really people know how to weave a narrative to get you to think what they want to think. That's the type of power that comes from some people. And that's what RFK is trying to do here.
Is a billionaire day globally, but it was these policies that they had.
And there are grains of truth in here. Like I said, most of what he's talking about right now, I agree with him.
Adopted, and it was, it really destroyed the middle class, not only in our country, but all over Western Europe as well.
And so whether we agree on the shutdowns, the vaccine or not, the wealth did shift, and it has been shifting throughout for the last 40, 50 years, and it's...
Good point, Cenk.
Obviously, because they're paying the politicians, and then politicians are passing laws that allow them to make more and more money. And this also happened during the 2008 housing crisis. In the recovery in 2010, 94% of the gains went to the top 1%. So it happens under Democrats, it happens under Republicans. Yeah, they should have gone to jail, they didn't.
They became billionaires.
So let me ask you a specific question about one of the effects of that corruption. By the way, again, I preface that as we totally agree, because I started a PAC called Wolfpack to get money out of politics to do exactly that. So I couldn't agree more on that. Housing, that is another area where the banks are coming in, starting to buy all the residential real estate. And again, both the corporate Democrats and Republicans say there's nothing we could do. We have to just let them buy all the real estate, and the housing prices are going through the roof. What's your answer?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of state where we are.
This might get stupid based on his previous statements about free markets.
2 years ago, the average price in the house was $223,000. The average price of a home, $223,000. Today, it's about $415,000, and the interest rates have gone from 3% to 7%. So a kid trying to get that house is it's out of reach, and part of the reason is just inflation, which is driven by this, basically the war economy and the war machine. And, President Biden and President Trump each running up $8 trillion. President Trump said he was going to balance the budget. And in 4 years, he spent more money than every president from George Washington to George W. Bush combined, 283 years of history. And that money, of course, they didn't levy taxes.
I don't know if any of that's adjusted for inflation. But yeah, no, Trump cut taxes and then spent money like crazy.
They just printed, and that printing it is a theft, because it caused inflation, and inflation is a tax.
A lot of things cause inflation. Sometimes there is something to be said. There is something of value to quantitative easing. But yeah, no, overall, yeah, you can create inflation that way.
Tax on the poor, on working people, on anybody with fixed incomes is a theft.
My point is more that he's being hyperbolic when he says it calls it theft, and also that he's saying things that are true in a way to try and weave it into a narrative that he's trying to put forward. It's a populist narrative, if that means anything to you. He's oversimplifying. He's oversimplifying is what I'm trying to say.
And it is, it's a, and Biden is now doing the same thing. Oh, we have inflation, but the inflation in housing is different than anything else. It is exponential. And one of the principal reasons for that is you have these giant corporations, particularly BlackRock, the State Street, Vanguard, also Fidelity, but those three.
I used to work for an insurance company that was owned by another company that was owned by another company. And one day we were informed that we had been sold by the original company, by this other company that I'd never heard of before, that apparently owned the company that I had thought had just bought us. But apparently that company sold that company that owned us. And the name of the company that sold that company, who we belonged to, was called White Mountain. I literally, there were billions, and I'd never heard of them until that moment. If people are like, the fact that he can name these corporations here means that somehow these corporations have entered the main conversation of our societal zeitgeist. There are other super wealthy corporations, banks, insurance companies, and whatnot that we haven't heard of yet.
Companies which are the biggest corporations in the world. BlackRock, I think, is the third largest economy in the world. If you just look at,
That's actually fucking scary. I don't know if I trust his stats, but that is scary.
At its assets, $16 trillion in assets under management, but they Those three companies own 89% of the S&P 500. So they own the economy, and now they're trying to.
Now, in fairness, that's broken up between 5 different companies, which is still a lot of concentrated power. But we don't know the exact breakdowns of their levels of power from that statement.
Buy up all the agricultural land and all the single-family homes, residential housing. So our kids who are trying to get into a house are competing for the cost of money with the biggest companies in the world that have not only a perfect credit rating, but below, the amount that they pay is almost zero for cash. And they have to compete with them. And, I'll tell you, the punchline is that I'm going to, the day that I get into office, and we already have a bill written, I'm going to put in a bill to make it illegal for investment houses to own single-family homes, to buy them, mass purchase single-family homes. It's wrong. We don't have to do it. We can regulate it. We can make it illegal.
Just make it illegal for private equity to buy residential homes.
Huge numbers. You may have a limit on how many that they buy, but it's not going to be 10,000. Last year, I think 30% of the new houses purchased in this country were purchased by them. And we all know people who went out, who were about to go buy a home, and they went into escrow, or they were about to sign a contract, and at the last minute, somebody comes in with a cash offer 20% above the asking price and snatch that home off the market. And
we both know people who proceeds to give unaccounted for statement. That being said, I think this happens. I'm pointing out to you that the way he is forming his argument is merely unsubstantiated and an emotional appeal. That being said, I do think it's this is how I suspect banks to operate. So I wouldn't be shocked by this statement if it was true, but he's not substantiating it well.
And the person's left saying, who is this who just stole my home? And then you find it's an.
But it is a technique that is effective at convincing people who aren't being critical. That's sort of the important point.
LLC, when you look into it, with an ambiguous name, and when you start following the strings, it leads you to BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and Fidelity.
Like most populist rhetoric, actually.
Yeah, I'll tell you, on this issue alone, you've got a shot at winning, because if we don't start the private equty guys from buying all the homes, we're not going to be able to create any wealth in this country anymore. Because homes are where we create our wealth.
Exactly. After World War II, we had the biggest middle class. We invented the middle class in our country.
The reason we have such a big middle class is due to a lot of factors. I wonder what he's going to say those factors are.
And part of it,
or if he's going to oversimplify it into one main point that he wants to use the success of that time period to like bolster.
When I was a kid, my uncle was president. In the beginning of the 60s, we owned half the wealth on the face.
Oh, right, his uncle's JFK.
Of the earth and our country. And part of that was because.
I thought you said the Kennedys. I believed it, but.
No, we owned a much smaller piece of it. But part of the reason was because we had obliterated, the World War II had obliterated the industrial base of Europe, and our base was, was in great shape in cooking. But more importantly, after World War II, with the GI Bill, with the highway system, and a lot of other legislation, we got every American into a home. So, and once you get into a home, something.
Every white American.
Magical happens. First of all, you care about your community. You care about your police. You care about your transportation. You care about your the firefighters. You go to the PTA meetings. You care about your lawn, the appearance of your house, your neighbors, et cetera. But more importantly, you now have equity. So if you have an entrepreneurial impulse, you can pursue it. You can take a second mortgage on your home and bet that to build a yoga studio or a sporting goods store or a saloon or, what.
I actually love his examples. They are funny.
whatever, a bowling alley. And so that you had this huge ferment of small business, which 90% of the new jobs that were created,
specifically of businesses,
in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, were all coming from small business. And that was the driving force in American capitalism. It also stabilized our country. It created this middle class. So the stratification between rich or poor was shrunk. And when you eliminate the middle class, which we've done now, and you have this new oligarchy of billionaires, and you have widespread poverty below, that configuration is too unstable to support democracy sustainably. So we're going to lose democracy if we don't have a middle class, and we don't have one anymore. We are killing it. There's 61% of the people in this country cannot put their hands on $500 if they have an emergency. And if you live in that cohort, Cenk, and the engine light comes on in your car, it is the apocalypse, because you're not going to be.
The engine light coming on in your car is a fucking nightmare, especially if you live in a place that does e-check.
Able to pay the mechanic, you can't get to your job, you're not going to be able to pay your rent, you're going to end up on the street. And there's this great economist in San Francisco who's looked at homelessness, right? And I always thought, you go to San Francisco and it's crazy there right now. Mm-hmm. Los Angeles California has 50% of the homeless people in our country. In California. Mm-hmm. You say, why is that?
Probably because it's warm.
And you go and you say, it has something to do with drug addiction. It has something to do with mental illness, because a lot of these people
homeless people sometimes migrate. So they'll go to places that are warm, where it's safe to stay outside in the winter without dying.
Mentally ill.
I'm not saying that's all the homelessness in California, but you also have to think that people who become homeless in California have less incentive to suddenly walk across the country than, if you're born somewhere cold. I mean, if you become homeless somewhere cold.
But what they find when they look at it is that the drug addiction is a very small part of it. And a lot of people who are homeless are mentally ill, but
Did he substantiate the thing about the fifth after World War II? I feel like I missed it.
Become mentally ill after they become homeless. You spend a couple of days on the grade, and you start to lose your reality. Starts to warp. The one correlation is housing prices. If the higher the housing price, and California is the highest housing price, the more homeless you are. So those people are just like every other American. They just had two flat tires at the same time, and they couldn't get into a home.
So
that checks out as far as I'm aware. Makes sense, and I'm pretty sure I've heard that is true. I mean, it does make sense that where it is harder to buy a house, there will be more homeless people. I get that. Actually even just seems common sense. Actually, it's so common sense. I want to make sure the statistic's real.
I think homelessness has a lot of range of factors, and meth.
It does, but only roughly 30. And I've looked this thing up before. Roughly only 35%, or roughly a third of homeless people use substances, including alcohol and drugs. I think it's like 35%, and another 35% or so, it's somewhere in there, are families who are led by actually no, it's the family is higher. I'm gonna fuck up the family number, so never mind. But the point is that only about a third, I want to say roughly 35% of homeless people are homeless because of drugs. That is a huge misunderstanding.
Skyrocketing is affected it, but overall,
and they might not even be homeless because of drugs. Drugs might be actually the side effect of being homeless.
There's no question California has the 4 highest cities for housing prices in the country. All 4 are in California, and housing prices out of control in California, more homeless in California. But the main point is it's
probably what's going wrong with San Francisco also.
the equity that we lose in our homes alone, we will be permanently serfs.
Damn it, Ruben, you done vape too much weed. San Francisco's in California, you stupid stone piece of shit.
Of private equity and
Exactly.
bankers.
We're going from an ownership society to a rental society, and when that happens, we go from being citizens to being subjects. It is a feudal model. It's a colonial model. It's the model we fled in Europe, and now we're bringing it here to this country.
So, okay, now that we've done those agreements, back to disagreements. Okay, so as I see that, and I think on housing proposals, money and politics proposals alone, you've got me very interested, right? So then I look at your what you say about Gaza, and I want to tear out all my hair. Okay.
Oh. Do I want to talk about this right now? I don't know if I want to talk about the Middle East while I'm this stone. It's legal in my state. Suck it.
So so help me try to understand what you're thinking here. You talk in such harsh language about the Palestinians, talking about bombing them to denazify them.
Wait, what? Okay, that's if he confirms that he said that, I'm sorry. Like so the Middle East is very complicated. There's a lot of shit going on there, but like that's so out of pocket. I was genuinely taken back by it. Like that is not a centrist position.
Last I checked, you still were not for a ceasefire after 37,000 dead. You talk of Palestinians oftentimes as terrorists. It's perplexing. So
Hamas are terrorists. Not all Palestinians are Hamas.
Wait a minute. No, I don't talk about Palestinians as terrorists. I don't believe that. I consider myself extremely pro-Palestinian, and
let's see what happens.
And by the way, my dad there was a Palestinian who was involved in the murder of my father. He didn't kill him, but he was involved in the ambush. And then my brother.
He was also a Rosicrucian, the man who shot RFK. Robert Kennedy. I mean,
and
for anyone who is not aware, his father.
And pled guilty. My brother then was hijacked by Black September, by the Palestinian group 5 years later, and his plane was brought to Yemen and blown up, and with the terrorists demanding the release of the person who was convicted of my father's murder. When Sirhan was convicted, my family wrote a letter to Judge Walker asking him not to apply the death penalty to Sirhan. And, as you know, I've been to meet Sirhan.
John F. Kennedy was against the death penalty. It's very likely that many other family members shared it.
But very hard for his release. And, I go by facts. I don't go by passion. I don't.
Then use more facts. Use more facts. Give me some statistics and the data. Don't tell me stories where you're like, we both know someone who. That's.
I don't go by prejudice. I don't go by pressure. I think I just don't see how, and I think Hamas is the villain. The Palestinian people are not the villain. Hamas is a terrorist group. It's a terrorist group that is committed to the annihilation of Israel. Hamas has been attacking Israel with rockets, 2,000 rockets a year since 2006. It ended the invasion October 7th. I can't conceive that any other nation in the world that if they were attacked in that way with that kind of savage brutality by a government or a group that is sworn to the annihilation of their country, that wants nothing else, that will not negotiate for anything else. I don't say how you leave them ruling Gaza and then try to rebuild it. And I want to look. I have a tremendous compassion for what's happening there now. Every death there is heartbreaking, and I think all of us feel that way. But it was not. It was Hamas. I blame Hamas, not Israel. So
okay, yeah. Well, see, that's where you're wrong.
I'll just let them hash this one out.
Not because Hamas is innocent. No, you blaming Hamas makes sense. They did October 7th. Everyone agrees, great sympathy to Israel, 1,200 people killed, and sometimes in brutal fashion, 34 kids killed. So you go after Hamas, I agree with you, okay? But when Israel kills 30 times as many civilians, there's some point you can't keep saying, oh, Hamas made me keep killing all of your civilians. Golly gee, it was all an accident. I'm the most moral army on earth. I just happened to kill 30 times the number of civilians that Hamas did. And Hamas is a terrible terrorist organization. So at what point do you say this isn't defending yourself anymore? All of Gaza is destroyed. We all have eyes, we have ears. You know, we say that about Biden. Democrats say, oh no, he's a dynamo. Brother, we got eyes and ears. We can see that the guy can barely talk and walk, right? The MAGA guys say, oh, Trump never lies. Brother, we got eyes and ears. The guy lies all the time. You look at Gaza, they leveled the place. It's gone. And like 85% of them are homeless now. At what point do you draw a line, Bobby, and go, God damn it, that's enough, stop killing them?
I would draw the line when Hamas lays down its weapons and says.
So if Hamas doesn't lay down their weapons, now innocent Palestinian civilians held captive by both the Israel occupation for 57 years, brutal occupation. Okay, hold on, and Hamas. Let's say Hamas. Let's say Hamas.
Wait, no.
Okay, so now, but Israel gets to kill as many Palestinians as they want for ad infinitum because there's still a couple of Hamas guys left. Well, how do we know when all the Hamas guys are gone? So are you okay with 370,000 dead as long as there's a Hamas battalion left?
Number one, Israel is not occupying Gaza. Israel,
okay, that's crazy.
So, okay. Israel left Gaza in 2006 and Hamas took over Gaza in 2006. But
they don't control their borders, they don't control their water, their electricity, their power.
Right, and well, first of all, their water comes from desalination plants that are local. Israel has provided fuel from those plants. Gaza, but Hamas blaming Israel for turning them into an open-air prison is like it's like the guy who kills his parents and pleads to the court for mercy because he's an orphan.
But that's Hamas and Palestinians are different, though. You can ignore everything Hamas says, but the Palestinians are definitely.
That's a wild metaphor.
Definitely occupied. Israel has been brutally oppressing them for 57 years.
Wait a minute, Jay.
I mean, are they free? They're not free, are they, Bobby? They're definitely not free.
People in Gaza? Or Palestinians?
Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank, not remotely free.
Right. But Palestinians, there are 1.3 or 2.3 million Palestinians in Israel. It's 17% of the population. And they have all the rights of anybody else in Israel. They can vote, they can serve on the Knesset, they can,
yeah, but how about the 5.5 million that have no freedom? That are in the West Bank and Gaza Strip being kept in prisons for decade after decade after decade, using the excuse of, well, there's one Hamas guy that says Israel should be annihilated, so we're going to occupy 5.5 million of you. Well, there's always a jerk who's going to say, oh, I think Israel should be annihilated. I think this, and not only that, it's a greatly ironic argument that, hey, Hamas doesn't want Israel to be a state, and then Israel turns around and goes, I'm not going to let the Palestinians be a state. So aren't they worse than Hamas? Because it's not theoretical. They are literally preventing the Palestinians from being a state. That is what you say. Hamas is so terrible because they would prevent Israel from being a state. Well, Israel's already doing that to the Palestinians.
Yeah, so the Palestinians have been offered a state repeatedly in 1922, in 1930.
Technically true.
Are you gonna let me finish?
All right, go ahead.
Because you just went on a rampage.
Go ahead.
Okay. 1922, 1937, 1947, 1973, 1967, 1973. Each time they were offered, Israel offered them, the United Nations offered them, the League of Nations offered them, Britain offered them their own state in exchange for peace. 90% of the Palestinian mandate of Palestine was given to the Arabs. Only 10% was given to the Jews. So
wait, in 1948, no, they was they got half the land, and when they were only a third of the population.
In 1922.
1922.
Yeah, 1922.
But Bobby, in 1922, it was all Palestinians. So it's like saying, oh, okay, we're going to take 10% of your land. Are you okay with it? They say, well, no, I don't want you taking 10% of my land. Well, then it became 50%. Now it's like nearly 75%.
I mean, you go if you want to go back.
But
the Palestinians sided with the Ottoman Empire, fought with the Ottoman Empire. Mufti al-Husseini, who was the head of the Palestinians, was running the Arab Legion in the Ottoman army. The Ottoman army lost the war, and its empire was broken up.
So, like, this is the problem with the Middle East, is that the problem with the Middle East here is that, like, do you hear what we're talking about? We're going back to 1920, and we're going back to the Ottoman Empire. And these things are still relevant because they touch the lives of some people who are still alive. But, like, if we can't somehow get out of the last century with our world conflicts, one begins to wonder if those world conflicts will ever actually end. He said 1922. That's over 100 years ago. Not a lot over 100, still over 100 years ago. There have been multiple generations of Palestinians and Israelis at this point who have been born in those places, whose whole lives have been those places. That's why it's a mess. That's why when you try to apply empathy to it, it feels like you're running into conflicts. Because there is a worthwhile amount of empathy for both sides on a certain level. Because at a certain point, this is people trying to live with the decisions that were made before they were even born. And it continues to just, and those bad decisions continue to build on top of each other so that both sides have a certain amount of, well, yeah, well, they did this that they could all reach for. And it's brutally it's one of the most brutally complicated things going on in our world. And I'm not telling you that there's plenty of criticism for Israel. I do not like Netanyahu. The whole situation is a rock and a hard place. Because you see, like, here's the thing, is that Hamas wanted Israel to attack them. Hamas wanted Israel to kill lots of innocent civilians, because all Hamas cares about is being recognized on the world stage. And if that means there's got to be a bunch of dead civilians on either or both sides, then Hamas will do that. On top of that, then you have Israel, who, like, they're in kind of a tough spot there, because you can't do nothing, but if you do attack and you do kill thousands of innocent civilians, then you're also doing exactly what Hamas wanted you to do.
Under Woodrow Wilson's pressure, the League of Nations said, okay, all of these lands of the Ottoman Empire that were once run by the Ottomans are going to be divided up and given to the local people who live there. The British came in and said, can the Palestinians and
only around 23 minutes left, Ruben. You can do it. Power through.
Jews live together in one land. First of all, the Jews had fought with Britain. They fought with the Allied powers. Mm-hmm. The Arabs had fought against them. When you lose a war, there's a consequence. Britain made a promise to the Zionists, you will get your own nation. They didn't give them everything they promised. They gave 90% of Palestine to the Arabs, and they left a little sliver, 10%, for the Jews. The Jews started their own nation in 1948. The United Nations approved it, but the Arabs said no. The Arabs were offered their country. The Jews were offered theirs.
So listen, I'm not going to.
Since then,
all right.
Yeah. Okay, so just let me finish. On numerous occasions since, Israel has offered, with Ehud Barak, with Yasser Arafat, everything that the Palestinians had previously asked for, which was the 1967 borders. And incidentally, check, up until 1993, The official position of the entire Arab League and the Palestinians is that Israel could not have a state even the size of a postage stamp. Oh,
but they do have a state, Bobby,
right?
And the Palestinians don't. And you want to perpetuate that injustice?
No, but the Israelis have constantly offered them again and again. Let's have your state. We'll trade it for peace.
No, okay, so look, I don't want to get into a giant debate about this because we could just debate it for hours.
Yeah.
I'll just say I just want to ask you 2 questions about it. Look, on the peace treaties, we can go back and forth. You say, oh,
I want to go back to that statement you claimed he made earlier. I want to hear it. I want to hear him explain that one.
oh, well, we offered it. I say, yeah, if you come to somebody and says, give me half your house. And the guy goes, why should I give you half my house? No, I reject. You go, you rejected my peace treaty. Now I'm taking half your house. Now I'm taking 2/3 of your house.
Now you're arguing again, because all of these things I can answer. So if you
come on. Bobby, they started with 10%, now they got 2/3, and you're still saying not enough. Not enough. Well, squeeze the Palestinians more. Squeeze them more. So tell me, when do the Palestinians get a state? Can they do the same exact thing that Israel did? Say, go to the United Nations and ask for a state. Can they do that? Isn't that fair?
Well, you know, they gave them a state. They gave them Gaza, and they used.
They didn't, Bobby. Look at it. They cut off the water, the power, the border. That's not a state. You know that's not a state. It's technically not a state. It's legally not a state. It's the reality not a state. It's come on. It's not in the reality-based world. You think Gaza controls its own borders? You think it controls its own water and power right now? Or can Israel obliterate it at any time that it wants?
Can I answer that question, or are you just going to start filibustering again?
No, you're the guy. I'm asking you a question. Do the Palestinians ever get to have a state? Can they go to the UN and do the same exact thing Israel did?
Okay, are you going to let me talk?
Go ahead.
Okay. You talk about the border. Well, Hamas, the day that it took over, began attacking Israel, sending commandos across, sending rockets across on civilian populations. A lot of people say, I've heard many times, that Gaza is the most densely populated place in the world. That's not true. That's not even close to true. Tel Aviv is twice as densely populated. Hamas sent 2,000 rockets a year onto civilian populations in Tel Aviv. Almost all, there's millions of Jews who live in bomb shelters because they're being attacked all the time. No other nation would put up with that. Israel did something that any nation would do, which is to put up a fence and said, we don't want any more. We don't want any more commandos coming over here and killing.
But that doesn't really explain the control of their seaport.
Our citizens. So, and then the Hamas complains, they're locking us in an open air prison. Well, they can still leave through Egypt. So there's more than one border to Gaza. But the Israelis have said, we've done what any other nation would do, which is to put up a fence and say, and not only that, but Israel continued to supply water and fuel.
So no, they cannot get a state.
We were talking about something else. Of course they can get a state. They can get a state.
I mean, that was the question, RFK. That was the question. You make some good points in your speech, but it does not answer Cenk's question.
If they negotiate a peace, they say to Israel.
But you'll constantly say, well, I can't negotiate with Hamas. So it's a dead end. So who do you negotiate with?
I think, listen, if Hamas was willing to negotiate, I'd say go ahead and negotiate.
But you always say Hamas is not willing to negotiate, even when they say they are willing to negotiate. No. They just said yes to a ceasefire. Israel says no to its own ceasefire.
That's not true.
That's literally true. That just happened today, and Benny Gantz confirmed it.
No, that is not true. But let me go back to that. Hamas has in its charter a provision that says that any negotiation with Israel, except as a ruse, is a violation of Islamic law. That because Hamas is committed to the annihilation.
So then you're never going to get a state because you claim Hamas is in charge. There's 3 guys left. I'm going to let them keep bombing endlessly. And those 3 guys, I don't trust them, so I'm never going to do a peace deal with them. There's nobody else to do a peace deal with. So they never get a state.
You're putting words in my mouth.
So what do you want them to do? Say like Hamas to come out, say, okay, you can kill us, and so they all get killed, and then who takes over? There's nonstop pieces of the puzzle that you never get to it. So why can't we say, okay, screw Hamas? UN says Palestinian Authority that's in the West Bank is now in charge of both West Bank and Gaza Strip, just like we did with Israel. Palestine is now a state. Of course, my God, how long are we going to oppress these people? Do you not think they're oppressed? I mean, as president, would you just say, Israel, go ahead, do whatever the hell you want?
No, I think, of course, there's oppression, but do I blame Israel for that? Listen, I'm not a fan of Netanyahu's. I'm not a fan of Likud. I'm a long-term critic of the settlers, of Likud, of Netanyahu. I was opposed to the judicial reforms last summer. I think Israel
He's not really a politician, so it doesn't really matter that he opposed them.
As the greatest judiciary in the world, and his attempts to downgrade that, I think, were a disaster for the moral case for Israel. But I blame Hamas for what's going on.
That's easy. Okay, I got you. We disagree on it. We're going to move on. So, okay, now one other thing that caused me concern that I wanted to run by you. So,
why didn't you make him clarify that one comment you said at the top? That was a very out-of-pocket comment, and I would really like to hear him either explain it or confirm or deny it.
And when you talked about the COVID vaccine, you said the Chinese and Ashkenazi Jews are less susceptible to it. So that caused me a lot of concern, Bobby, and I'll tell you why. Because you know that there's already building hatred at the time towards the Chinese, right? And so, the China virus is what Trump calls it, et cetera. And again, all the scientists say, no, it's not, it doesn't avoid the Chinese. And then Ashkenazi Jews, well, then that's a second.
Having just looked at the numbers, China was way more vaccinated than America. It was one of the most vaccinated countries in the world.
Thing that causes me concern, because then I say, wait, there's a lot of anti-Semitic tropes about how the Jews run the world, and if there was a virus that broke out and Jewish people are exempt from it and Chinese people are exempt from it and it came from China, that sounds really dangerous. So when you said that, Bobby, A, what did you mean, right? And do you get why people were worried about that statement? Like, whoa, that seems to feed into some thoughts that are not positive for the world. So tell us, help us out.
I mean, this goes back to what you were saying at the outset, that the mainstream media reports things that I said with a certain spin on them to make them seem alarming or to make me seem crazy.
I'm always concerned if someone starts answering a question by doing this exact thing. The thing about it is, though, is that he could be right, but it is concerning because this is what a person who is trying to create their own spin would say.
So let me give you the context in which I made this, in which I had that discussion. I had a private dinner that was with some journalists, and it was under Chatham House rules. You know what that means? Chatham House rules, right?
Yep.
What does that mean?
So I hear you, but at the same time, Bobby,
let me finish.
But you said it.
Let me finish.
No, you
Chatham House rules. I have no idea what that means.
ask me a question, but that's go ahead.
Let me finish. Yeah, I just wanted to, Chatham House rules mean it's off the record, that you're not allowed to report it.
Oh, okay. I'm glad he explained it. That was actually going to be my guess, but I didn't want to guess and be, wrong.
And we were talking about bioweapons and the growth of bioweapons, particularly with AI, and I'm deeply concerned. I just wrote a book about bioweapons, so I know a lot about them. And
if you write a book about them, it doesn't necessarily mean that you know a lot about them. I'm just going to throw that out there. Stephanie Myers wrote a book about vampires, and it's very clear from her book that she don't know shit about vampires.
And that there's a whole now science of ethic bioweapons that have been that are being developed by China, by Russia, and particularly by the United States. And I made the remark.
As a populist, you always got to take a shot at your own incumbent government.
That you could actually ethnically target certain bioweapons to attack certain races. And in conjunction with that, I mentioned an NIH.
I will say, though, that if there's one thing that I have learned from all this 23andMe and Ancestry.com shit, is that everyone's a lot more mixed up than we think they are. So I don't know how effective those things are going to be.
Paper that had just been published. And anybody who wants to, who's listening to this show, can look this up. It's NIH, and what that NIH paper said was that the docking site from the spike protein, so the part of the spike protein that actually docks with the ACE2 receptors in your lungs, and it was neatly fitted.
Actually, it's weirder. Why is it better that this was off the record as a conversation? Why would that's actually sketchier if it's off the record.
So that it was more likely to affect certain races and not affect others. The most compatible races were blacks and Caucasians. The least compatible race was people from Finland. The second most was Ashkenazi Jews.
Which would actually explain how certain Scandinavian countries got away with being so flagrant with their policies.
And the third was Chinese. Oh, I was talking about this, never
It spread like crazy in China.
Suggested that it had been developed with that intention. But what I said is that because even COVID affects, apparently, according to this study, affects some races more than more, it's a suggestion that you could develop ethnic bioweapons using that same kind of technology. So I was never suggesting that people deliberately developed or cultivated COVID as a bioweapon against certain races. I was just citing a paper, which anybody can look up. And what do you say about that? I mean, should we be able to talk about science even when it's controversial?
Well, so
it's weird that it was off the record, because that makes it feel like on a certain level, you also consider this topic to be like iffy.
This gets back to the discussion we had earlier, which is that, yeah, but I just read something and
or you have some self-awareness of how it will sound.
Again, I'm not an expert on it. I'm not I'm not a scientist, but I read an article that quotes scientists that say that no, that it doesn't affect whites or blacks more significantly. It doesn't, and Caucasian's not really even a race.
But I wasn't arguing that.
Etc.
I wasn't arguing that it did do that. I was just citing a peer-reviewed, published paper that said that.
So I get what you're saying.
And made those observations.
And I understand
so
what
I wasn't saying, and I don't think if you did an epidemiological study, you could show that Ashkenazi Jews did any better than Caucasians. I don't know. Oh, I would be shocked. Well, it may be that some races, there's certainly some nations that did a lot better, but we don't know why. But all I was doing was I was citing a paper. I wasn't saying that it was true.
But do you get that? Look, I'm going to give you that it was. No, I'm going to explain. First, I want to give you credit. I get why you mentioned that it was off the record, because you weren't trying to make a public statement.
Exactly.
And if you make a public statement, then it becomes more of I intended this or that.
And everybody is looking for a blood libel to use against Jews.
But it's also weird that it was off the record, because it sounded like an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Like, if you say that shit out loud, then we know that you're a race realist. But like, if you're saying it's secretly behind doors, it implies you're hiding intentions about those ethnic groups, specifically your intentions towards those ethnic groups. But I get what Cenk's saying here too.
If you say that publicly, there are bad people out there who will take that and run with it. So I wouldn't say it publicly.
Okay, so but that's what I was going to get at. I was going to say, do you get that if people think that that's the case, it's going to lead to dark paths?
Yeah.
Now, if it actually was the case, and we're studying it, and it turns out randomly it's it's Ashkenazi, it's Koreans, etc. We're going to have a conversation about that.
I did it off the record.
Right, we're going to have a conversation about that. But number one, it isn't, right? And number two, you acknowledge that if you just go out there without being absolutely sure of it, it's going to trigger those tropes. And
well, yeah, but I wouldn't do that.
Okay.
I did it in a private setting, and I was remarking on a very interesting paper, and that's all. I wasn't, making a personal assertion. I wasn't vouching for the paper.
Right.
I was just saying it's interesting that this is out there.
All right, last thing, defense. You propose what appears to be massive cuts to defense spending. So obviously they're going to fight you tooth and nail on that. The Democrats and the Republicans are totally in the tank for the defense contractors who give them millions upon millions of dollars in campaign donations, oftentimes hire them and the generals after they retire. So how much can you cut in defense? Is it realistic, and how do you get it done?
Well, I mean, the amount, and listen, I've talked to all kinds of military experts about these cuts. The amount that I would cut our defense budget back to was the height of defense spending during the Cold War. It's called the Eisenhower minimum. So at the very height of the Cold War tensions, this was our military budget in 2024 real dollars. And we were told, if you remember, Cenk, in 1992, when the walls came down in Europe, that we were going to get a defense, we were going to get a dividend, a peace dividend. We were told that the $600 billion military budget at that time was going to be cut back to $200 billion. Well, the real defense spending right now is up to about $1.3 trillion.
I wouldn't have a problem with reducing defense spending, to be honest.
You include the DOE and national security. So instead of going down to $2 billion, which was deemed adequate to protect our borders, to make us too expensive to ever invade,
you could definitely save money on those fighter jets that can't fly in the rain.
To protect the sea lanes and neutral areas like the Antarctic.
By that I mean stop buying them.
And have a two-strike capacity in 2 different theaters of the globe. That was deemed enough right now. I intend to cut it in my first 4 years from the actual Defense Department budget, which is about $950 billion, to $500 billion, and then look for cuts after that.
So nearly half.
Nearly half. And you need to do that because our country is being weakened, not because of our, a weakened military, but because of our economy. We need to bring that money back home and invest it in rebuilding the middle class in this country and rebuilding our industrial base. The real strength of a nation comes from the health of its citizens, the wealth of its citizens, the robustness of its economy, and we're losing that. Every nation, we've spent $8 trillion.
I have nothing to say against any of this.
On wars over the past 20 years. Every nation in which we intervened is worse off than we found it. Iraq is, we killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein.
How do celebrities like Justin Bieber and The Rock generate hundreds of millions of dollars? It's actually...
Iraq, we created ISIS. We drove 4 million refugees up to Europe. We've destabilized all the Western democracies, created Brexit as a direct result of the spillover war that we had in Syria. We pushed Iraq into a proxy posture with Iran, which was the foreign policy outcome that we tried to avoid for 20 years. And if you look at every place we intervene, the same thing. It's been a catastrophe, and now our addiction to war is creating BRICS, the emerging, the end of the dollar as the world reserve currency, and the world trade currency, and the world.
In fairness, BRICS' new embrace of war might also undermine their rise.
Safe haven, which is going to be like a nuclear bomb dropping on our economy. So it's weakening us year after year. The Chinese did what my uncle wanted to do, and did. They instead of projecting military power abroad, they projected economic power. So while we were spending $8 trillion bombing bridges, roads, schools, ports, and airports, they spent $8 trillion building schools, bridges, roads, ports, and airports. And they're making friends everywhere. The Chinese are now the principal creditor in almost every nation in Latin America and almost every nation in Africa. And, my uncle did that. He refused to go to war, refused to send any combat troops abroad. He said he wanted children in Africa, when they heard of the United States, not to think of a man with a gun and a military uniform, but to think of a Peace Corps volunteer, to think of the Alliance for Progress, USAID. And those were programs he created to grow the middle class and run the oligarchies and the military dictators of those countries and grow their middle class, to give aid directly to the middle class.
Is there a reason he has to say my uncle and not my uncle John F. Kennedy?
There are more statues to my uncle, more boulevards named after him, more avenues, more universities, streets, and parks than in almost every country.
To be fair, he also did Vietnam.
In Latin America, Africa.
But according to Robert McNamara, John F. Kennedy wanted to pull out of Vietnam.
Asia than any other president, and probably more than all other American presidents combined. And that is a good foreign policy, to have the world actually love you. And we're going to get that by projecting economic power abroad. You know, the Chinese want world domination.
He's technically right about why we need to spend money in other countries.
But they spend a quarter to a third on their military budget that we do. They don't want a hot war with us. They want, and I'm not scared about competing with them on the economic landscapes. It's going to be good for us. It'll be good for them. It'll be good for every country in the world. That's what everybody wants from.
Oh, this is what he thinks a free market is. Okay, I see.
Us. And it will restore our moral authority as a nation, or restore our leadership. We're going to cut back by recognizing we live in a multipolar world right now. Most of our military spending is spent not for self-defense, but to dominate the globe. The Chinese have a base and a half abroad. The Russians have one base. We have 800, and each one is looking for a fist fight. Oh, you know, we need to.
That's a little bit of an oversimplification. Yes, America does have an aggressive foreign policy. There are many instances, though, where we are in those other countries at the behest of those countries.
Close those bases, bring that money home, spend it growing the middle class in this country. And
well, that's very appealing. But you reminded me of one last thing. You mentioned your dad not killed by Sirhan. He was part of the night, obviously. He fired a couple of bullets, but the bullets, and I've seen you talk about this, that killed him come from the back, and Sirhan was in the front. The case you lay out is nearly, in my opinion, nearly indisputable. Then the question is, other than that particular guy, Cesar.
Eugene Cesar, he was the security guard who was holding my father's elbow, who escorted him into the ambush, and then it appears that he fired the shots that killed him, the 4 shots that killed him. And I actually had a lot of contact with him just before he died 2 years ago. I was trying to go and see him in the Philippines. And he...
Interesting. I didn't know, you know, this actually explains a lot about RFK Jr.
He said he would meet with me for $10,000, and then he said, 20, and then 25, and it became clear that he wasn't, real.
So, but other than that individual, who do you think was behind killing your dad and your uncle?
I never do speculation.
Out of all the things you refuse to speculate about, after I sat through this video full of you speculating, you're gonna...
That I can't, like, if you read my Anthony Fauci book, Cenk, I never say what was going on in his head, and I never say what was going on behind the scenes. I only record what I can prove. And I have 2,200 footnotes, and nobody's found any mistakes in it. Oh, I can't tell you.
I find that hard to believe. I have no counter argument. It just, I feel like I need to see that.
Who it was. I can tell you that, Eugene Cesar, that Lisa Pease did the biggest book on my father, the most important book on my father's assassination. And she found that Cesar identified himself as a CIA agent. Oh, he had top secret clearance. He worked for Lockheed. I think he worked for Boeing, and he worked for Hughes Aircraft. And he had gotten the job as a security guard just 2 nights before, after my father's schedule was released. And then he was the security guard that grabbed my dad in the ballroom, took him into the kitchen where he wasn't supposed to go, led him into that ambush, and he had his own gun pulled. He was seen by 12 eyewitnesses, never denied it. And he told the police that he had pulled it to shoot at Sirhan, but there's nobody ever saw that.
Yeah.
And
the case is amazing because the
Okay, so I believe a little bit of speculation here that it might have been the CIA that killed both your father and your uncle.
bullets are about an inch from his neck, and
they were all contact shots. They all left a carbon tattoo. So in each
if he's
shot,
a shot that he was trying to shoot Sirhan, and he shot your dad in the back of the neck, he's a very awful shot 4 times.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, maybe you get to solve that if you're president. I mean, that would be a hell of a thing. I mean, I imagine those are files you would want to take a look at to see what happens there. On that alone, that might be worth, because no other president ever goes in and tells us what actually happened. So
yeah, I'm going to have transparency. So I don't know if there's UFOs or not, but everybody's going to know whatever they know as soon as I get in there. And, all these other, the government's not supposed to be keeping secrets in a democracy.
Yeah. So, Bobby, where can people find out more about your campaign?
Kennedy24.com.
Kennedy.
Okay. So, a lot of interesting stuff in there. I will say that 20-year-old Ruben might have voted for RFK Jr. Adult Ruben here, I mean, technically 20 is legally an adult, but you get the idea. Grown Ruben here now faces RFK Jr. with a lot of skepticism. A, because of the vaccine stuff. B, because of the brain worms. C, because he clearly is pro-free market while not understanding what free market means. Which, that's not great. That's not a great thing to hear. And I hate his free market environmental policies. Hate that. Hate everything about that. That was what tipped me off. He doesn't understand what a free market economy is or what libertarians actually want. Or at least extreme libertarians. I can't speak on all of them. Somebody's uncle was interesting. Something about his dad was interesting. A lot of stuff in there I didn't disagree with him on. But the reason that he makes me uncomfortable is because I've lived now a while longer and I'm more familiar with things like sales and like how you get people to like you in terms of like manipulation tactics that I've learned through sales and whatnot. And also from living through a Trump presidency. Because a major vibe I got here is that he is blue Trump. I don't know what that manifests in its entirety, though, is the thing. I don't know what the actual differences between him and Trump are when you break it down. But on certain levels, they are coming at the game from the same angle, which is the populist angle. And I used to call myself a populist. But the truth of the matter is that populism has a built-in revolutionary function, has a built-in appeal to victimhood, has a built-in claim of you about specifically your oppression. But people who come in with the populism almost never actually take out the problems, because what they're actually doing is creating lists of scapegoats and things that they can point to tell people to vote for them because, hey, these people are causing your problems. And the thing is, he said it's never completely a lie because we live in an interconnected economy that goes throughout like everything that we touch, basically. So yeah, interesting. Certainly a mixed bag as a human being from my observations. Some of that I might shorten this down because some of that I was too high for, and it was, yeah, we'll see what I do. I mean, you've already seen what I've done if you're watching this part. So really, I'm the person who at this point in our conversation, or I should say interaction, actually doesn't know what I am going to do. I am a time traveler. Thank you for sticking out this long. In fact, I hardly believe that you're even here at the end to watch this. But please like and subscribe, comment, share, maybe, yeah, whatever, on the YouTube. But this is also available where podcasts are available because this technically started as a podcast. I've just gotten super lazy with my content. I know, I need to have more conversations. But that involves talking to people and scheduling things. It's all I'm very busy right now, I guess that's what I'm saying. But thank you for tuning in here. And yeah, you can email the show at rubenuncut@gmail.com. Have a wonderful whatever, wherever, whoever you are.